I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 73 Challenger. If you saw the last video on this car, you saw where we panel gapped everything. We set all our door jambs, front, rear, the trunk. We kind of just worked all the body lines to make them perfect. On this video, you could see already the car looks a lot different than last time. We're gonna basically cut to this point, and I'm gonna show you what we did to get to this point of the car. What we're going to do on this video, we're going to split it into two sections. So this is a pre-bodywork and the start of a bodywork video. So halfway through the video, up to the halfway point, I'm going to show you where we're going to dial in all that metal work a little bit more. We're going to show you how to fix some high-low spots on the car before we go to the bodywork phase. If we could fix it in this metal phase, it's going to save us hours and hours of the bodywork down the road. So we're going to do that. We're going to strip off the E-coat. I'm going to show you how I do that. We're basically going to get the car looking as clean as it is. It looks really cool in this bare metal state. We'll do a quick walk around of the car just so you see it, and then once we're done with that and I show you how we get and dial in the metal work, the second part of this video is going to basically be body work in the car. How to take their car from a bare metal state where we're not going to touch a welder anywhere on this car, and we're going to take it and start building the polyester. We're going to start sealing the car up. I'm going to show you the proper steps. It's going to be a different video. If you saw my bodywork 101 video where we did the show car and we covered everything with filler front to rear, the idea on this one is we're going to try to do more driver quality. It's still going to look really nice, but we're not going to take it to the complete extreme. So follow along, stay tuned. We're going to work on this 73 Challenger. We're going to cut back now. I'm going to show you how we got to the metal point, and then once we're done with that, we're going to pick it up and we're going to start doing the lead channels, but we're not putting lead in there, so I'm going to show you that part too. So stay tuned. Let's get working on this car. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, I already started on the roof and the hood and the trunk, is I took 220 on a long block and we're blocking down the E-coat. So you can also do this if you have epoxy primer seal in the car. You're going to have to prep it before we reapply the epoxy and then put our polyester primer on here. Now, if you saw a previous video that I did on bodywork, we basically built the show car panel to panel and we stripped the whole car down to nothing, and we didn't do this step. The reason we didn't do this step is we knew we were going to cover this whole car front to rear in filler and block it all down as thin as possible, so that was the long version of this step. What we're trying to do on this more kind of driver quality, budget friendly, if there is a budget friendly bodywork thing, is we're basically going to try to just get most of this done on the polyester and get the high spots. So right now what we have to do first, we have to identify the high spots. This is also good to kind of just dial in the metalwork. So basically in a long shot, we block down with 220 like we would normally block a car. What we're left with right here is the low spots are still going to be the dark black and the high spots are going to come out in bare metal. So what we need to do now, we need to dial in the low spots and bring them out of the car. So for instance, there's obviously different ways you can do this. I'm going to show you first with the hammer dollies, kind of pry bars. Right there's a low spot right there. We're going to come back through, back of the trunk, put the dolly on the outside of it. Now, you could see this car looks really good, you know, in just the black. Once we start dialing it in and tapping it out and blocking it, you can see these are very minor imperfections. This is actually in the panel itself, in the stamping. But this is what you need to do, because if we don't do this step and we just painted this car, and once you get the clear coat, all these will come up as waves. So these would be the high spots and the lows. We're not going to worry about this because it's so close and the E-coat's so thin, that's going to be fine in the polyester. Even this will probably be fine. We're just kind of dialing it a little bit. So I'm also going to tap the highs around it. And we'll come through on the bottom here too. one right here is a really bad low spot. I want to get that one. And what this is caused from is mostly us messing with this door with the heat and everything. So this probably wasn't as bad, except for us messing with this edge. But let's fix this real quick. If you have access behind the panel, use whatever means is necessary to get the job done. Now with that dolly, I'm kind of rolling it down as I'm hitting it. So I'm hitting flush and I'm kind of rolling it with the curvature on the inside. You can feel it came up a little bit, and I'm gonna tap the highs down and see what we got. Same thing with the hammer. As I'm doing the hammer, I'm coming off and I'm kind of pushing the metal where I want it to go. All right, so let's block it again right here, see what we got, if anything changed. We want to use a block that's going to adhere to the shape of the quarter panel or the arc you're sanding. Now, you don't have to sand everything down. Like I said, you want to scuff and you want to just get the panel, just a good idea of what's going on with the panel. See, so actually now that we hit it, you can see right there, we pushed that area up. See how it moved this indentation over? So we are now gonna work this area right here. Coming back here, let's see what we did back here. So it's better. We're gonna work this area down a little bit more. Same thing, we're gonna just basically, I'm gonna keep tapping this down. I'm gonna keep tapping that up. We're gonna dial in our corner. So we'll put you on time lapse. We'll do some more of this quarter panel, the door, this side of the car. And then whatever we can't fix, we're gonna come back. I'm gonna show you how we're gonna do with the dent puller. We'll try to get our major spots out, because there are gonna be a couple spots, especially up here, that we can't get behind with the hammer, so we actually have to pull them out with a stud gun. So we'll time lapse and come back to that. So I want to reiterate, as we're blocking this down, that doesn't mean you have to have E-coat to block your car down. So if your car was in bare metal, you can use Dyka machinist dye, and you could spray it on the metal in certain areas and block it down. Or you could spray a coat of epoxy primer. That's what a lot of cars are done. The only reason we got lucky on this car and why we got to do the whole thing like this is because every panel was replaced on the car. Usually when I get a car in the shop, you know, we'll sandblast and I have to strip the old original panels knowing we're going to keep them. Well, once they're stripped, I go ahead and epoxy coat those parts initially. So then when we come back, I'm usually, like you see, if you watch my last video, you see we sit there and scuff the epoxy primer and then put a fresh coat on it right before this phase. Saying that, with this car, everything was in the E-coat, so we got lucky that we got to do the whole car. But like I said, there's many ways of doing it. What we're focused on more than anything is getting the metal straight. So how we do this, we're going to need a guide coat of some sort, whether it's the epoxy primer, whether it's the E-coat, whether you apply something else like the machinist dye, and then you need to take a straight block and sand it down, because you're not going to be able to see these highs and lows to the eye. So once you identify the highs and lows in your metal work, we're going to sit there and we're going to fine tune it with a hammer, dolly, dent pullers, whatever's at your means to get the metal straight. This is the part of the process that you don't really see because it's all covered over in filler, but realistically, the car is just going to come out so much better. We're especially working the edges, making sure they're straight, everything else. So the less filler we put on the car, the better it's going to be, and the less cost it's going to be down the road too. Now that we got the whole car pretty much hand sanded down and we exposed our low spots, we tapped down the high spots as best we can, but there's some areas that we're going to try to go back through and we're going to just pull up with a dent puller. So you could use a Chicago electric dent puller. We used it once on the other side just as a demonstration, and what I did to save some time, I went and I ground down all the holes on this side. We just finished this sole side right here, so the idea is to make it smooth. That was the same thing. It was from prying this trunk up. So we ground down the centers. We got some areas here circled, and we got this low spot that was a factory defect in the trunk. We're going to use our Pro Spot machine right here. It's going to be a little bit easier. It's basically a gun that pulls the dents against the sheet metal. You have different settings depending on the hole size. We're going to use the middle hole. That should be good for about what we're doing there. We might switch to the larger one right there because that's going to meet the circle. So we set it. We got a ground on the car close to it, and basically with this it works the same as the removable dent pullers I showed you with the Chicago Electric. It's going to weld this stud onto there, and then we're going to just basically pull it up, and we're going to repeat that. So we'll start over here. We're getting the center of each dent, and that's all it is, just that little bit of pull-in. Work it a little bit, and then to remove it you do a twisting motion. And that's all it is. That dent's pulled out, move on to this one. You could kind of see it pulling it up. You don't want to go too far. I mean, if you do, you just don't want to pull it through. Then what you do, if it is just a little bit high, you can kind of see that one crowned a little bit. We'll take the body hammer and we'll just tap the high back down. So you just keep working that. Let's do a couple more of these things and we'll swap the bits on them.
Realistically, the difference between this and the Chicago Electric dent puller is really, this is just a time saver. You see how much more efficient it is.
With this one, we are going to swap over to the larger hole size. We got larger area to pull. You should be able to see this one pull up pretty good.
With this Pro Pull gun, a lot of times it does like to pull the crown a little bit too much, so worst case scenario, we'll just heat shrink the highs down.
All right, we're going to work this area just a little bit with the hammer, but we're looking a lot better. Let's go over here, same thing. We're going to run it. Now with this one, we want to pull it this way to get the most amount of pull on that dent. It's almost like a crease right here.
So we'll show you later in the video, actually the dent puller would have probably been a little better on this trunk area to work it, because you know it's such a large area to pull against.
All right, I'm gonna work that a little bit more. We're gonna grind it up, we're gonna fix it up, but already that looks a little better. So we'll put you back on time lapse. We'll actually come back. I'll show you this also has a slide hammer. We'll do that on the door, and I'll pull some of those dent areas, and we'll move on, and then eventually we'll get this car stripped down. Now we're done with the trunk area and the Pro Puller. We're going to use the Pro Spot with the dent puller. You could see I was working this area and we got some good scuffs on everything. So this area up here is really close. We got one low spot right there that we can't get up. So we're going to work on that. Looking at the front, we got a spot right there that's really low around the mirror, defect in the door probably, and then right here, this area going down, there's a bracket here when we were working this fender, and the bracket laid the space in between the two supports inside. So we're gonna go ahead and pull those out, and I might look at up here a little bit later. So let's go ahead and grind out those areas or clean them up.
Obviously, any dent puller you choose to use will have to be used against bare metal.
We need to put a ground for our machine up there. Let me go put this back, and let's go turn the Pro Spot on, and we're setting it for single side. So basically we're using the same attachment as we did last time with that Pro pulling tool, but instead we got a slide hammer like you would on the Chicago Electric stud gun. So basically we're going to weld the stud there, and same thing, we'll twist it coming off. So set it for single side and the stud puller. So this is nice because you don't have to concentrate on one area. You could do a couple small blows on. So we click it on, and that's all it does, and then we twist. And see, we're trying to just pull it out a little bit at a time. So you see, right there, that got that. So now we'll work up here. I'll try to do it with my left hand so you can see pretty good.
Since this tool is so efficient, you see I do a lot of little blows and just move it around to pull everything up a little at a time.
All right, so now this one, there's our low spot right in the middle. We're gonna work our way right down that.
The key to using this kind of dent puller, the Pro Puller, a Chicago Electric stud gun, or other brands is basically as you're pulling up, you do not want to hurt the metal or separate it. You know, pull the chunk, the stud out of it. What you'll have to do then, you have to come back through with a welder, and now you have to add more heat, which is going to adjust the panel differently.
All right, let's get the flap disc real quick, and I'm gonna show you how you grind on it, and we'll finish that out.
Caveat on the flap disc is yes, I am removing a little bit of material and scratching it up. What I'm doing is mostly putting a little bit of heat in those focused high spots, taking them down. You could use a heat shrinking disc or a contact shrinker.
We get it a little bit warm, but you see the whole time I can touch it. Now, what I usually like to finish it off is with a slapper. So the slapper is nice because it evens out the load. So all those, the hit, and basically you're running on it and just almost bouncing off, kind of slapping it basically. So what you're going to do, we just run the slapper and we're going to run it sideways, and hopefully that should even everything out and finish it off.
Initially, when I start with the slapper, you see I'm using it more like a body hammer in a sense, where I'm holding on my slaps and kind of pushing down the metal. As we progress, you see as we're getting lighter and fine tuning it, I'll pull off my hits and slapping it, and you see it here, it makes a different sound completely.
Yeah, see, that looks a lot better. So we're gonna do that to this, and then this area over here with the slapper, and just kind of fine tune everything. This seems kind of excessive, I know. You know, we're worried about some little dings and divots in these fenders and everything else, but I will say, this is gonna save us time, material, and sanding down the road. If we fix these areas now, we don't have to come back and hit them later, or we don't have to stack every high. We would have to stack filler away from it and building it up. So we're trying to get the car leveled out and dialed in now, spending a couple extra hours, hopefully saving 2 times that, maybe 3 times the effort down the road. And filler material, really with the high build polyester primer, the dolphin glaze, that stuff is really expensive. So that's the idea what we're doing here. Let's go ahead, tackle the other side of this car. We're kind of dialed in on the metal work. We're just gonna fine tune it, and then we're gonna start stripping this car.
Like I said, just take this video as a guide to how I do it. This doesn't say you have to take your car to this level. I knew plenty of body guys that have no problem, and I mean, they'll say 100%, a 1/4 inch of good quality filler done right, and on these cars will last many years, and they're happy with it. For me personally, I don't think that's my style, obviously, and most of my videos, if you watch my YouTube channel, were mostly a metal channel. So I don't like filler. I mean, I've realized it's key takeaway on the auto body industry and the car restoration world, and you need to have it to dial in. But my goal is when we do this car, I would spend more time on the metal, working the metal, and getting this thing looking straight as we can. So really, we're shooting, I like to go max on the whole car, personally, a 1/16 of an inch. And even a 1/16 of an inch in places, I'm like, oh man, you know. So that's my philosophy. That's not saying that's right. Like I said, there's plenty of guys. Don't feel like if you can't get a high or low out that you failed, and this car is not going to be any good if you have to put some filler on that panel. There's not a problem. Try to keep the filler off the door jambs or anywhere else it's going to chip or have a tendency to fail. Another thing with filler, more importantly than even stacking filler on top of filler, is you need to follow the manufacturer's TDS sheet on how the filler is applied, and that will make the adhesion process of the filler even better, and it less chance of it failing down the road. That's the most important thing, to make sure your base of the filler, and as you're stacking it each time, has a proper grit, scuff area, either chemical or mechanical bond. So speaking of that, what this leads into right now is we're stripping the car, because at this point, and I've said this in other videos, I don't trust this e-coat. I don't know what's under it. I don't know how they adhered the eco. On the inner structure, I'm not super worried about this. A lot of times we'll just DA sand it. If it doesn't come off with the DA sander, or we get a good tooth on it, then we can put our stuff on top. But knowing that we're gonna bodywork this area, we're gonna have expensive paint on the outside skin of this Challenger, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take our Eastwood SCT with a 40 grit stripping drum. We're running it at a higher RPM with low pressure, and we're just cleaning the car front to rear. Everywhere we're gonna do bodywork to get that bare metal substrate to really get our good solid base. Once we have that good solid foundation to build off of, looking at this car right now, bare metal front to rear all the way around, then we can start building on that foundation. With the Eastwood SCT, I will say, do not use this as an area to be able to apply primer to. We're gonna have to scuff this area. This is the 40 grit drum. You can even put the red drum on this and polish this thing out so it almost looks like a DeLorean in stainless steel. But saying that, we're not going to do that. There's no reason to. We know the metal work looking down the side of it is panel to panel as best we can. Again, you are going to see some imperfections. It's not completely metal worked out, but like I said, we're looking at minor details that we probably will be able to cover in the high build primer, and really only a couple areas will probably need dolphin glaze to be added on top of that. We're going to probably skip the high build regular filler in this car. Something else I usually always try to do is I'll come back through, especially before I put the last coat of epoxy primer, and I'll go ahead and weld up the lead channels. Yes, these were spot welded, and they were also rosette welded like the factory would have done, but I like to take the extra step and just run a straight constant bead as much as I can down it, and then grind it smooth, just so I know nothing can get from the back of it. You could see I'm not really worried about these heat areas, as they're in a high build area and they're backed with support braces, but I was holding my hand on it just to make sure nothing warps and creates other issues.
All right, so you can see we already started some of the body work on the other side and the bottom. What we're gonna do, we're gonna fill out these factory lead channels. You saw on the last video what I ended up doing. I welded the lead seam here. Why I do that is, you know, factory, the panels gets put on with the roof onto the quarter. What we're trying to do, I weld it up in the practice that water from behind it, especially in the rocker, can't seep between these seams if there's no seam there that we welded up. So really all we're worried about doing is filling up this lead channel. I then scuffed it down with 80 grit. We're going to be using today, we're going to be using this kitty hair. It's long strand fiberglass reinforced body filler. So I don't use this as often. I'm kind of using it now to get a little bit better, so I'm not claiming to be an expert using this stuff. Another product I use all the time is all metal, which is going to act very similar. The all metal will dry faster. It's an aluminized filler. So why we're using this, and the all metal is very similar too, is it's waterproof, and we can pack it in this area a little bit cleaner. I never put, like I said, filler. This is like a polyester or a Bondo or a high build filler on bare metal, because filler is absorbent, it attracts moisture, so that will cause rust on bare metal. However, this right here is waterproof and water resistant. So actually, if we look at the TDS sheet, it actually says that you need kitty hair to stick on top of bare metal. I've heard stories that if you put it on top of epoxy, it doesn't stick as well. So I didn't want to ever test that out with a car. So what we're going to do, we're going to follow the TDS sheet, knowing it's corrosion, water resistant, corrosion proof, all that stuff. We're going to apply it first, fill up the lead channel. So what we're going to do with that, we'll just open it up, It's nothing, this is just like any other filler. You see it's got the long strand in there, and we'll take a little bit out on a paint mixing stick. And then what we're going to end up doing, we'll take our blue cream hardener. This is a very similar hardener that you would get in other fillers. And same thing, we'll just mix it up. I mean, there is a ratio, but we'll just mix it up like that. One line should be enough. This does take a little bit longer to harden than all metal. So the working time on this is a little bit longer. And you see, when we're mixing it up, just the long strands in there. Now, I will say, this is not gonna lay on smooth. Like, I mean, you can lay it on smoothish, but compared to the feather fill, the dolphin glaze, all that stuff, you're gonna have pinholes. We're not worried about this. What we're trying to do is pack this stuff on there and fill up the channel for the most part so we can go to the next step in the bodywork. So this is just taking up the grunt of it. We're not trying to super level this out or block it out by hand, and you'll see, if you use this or all metal, good luck. If you block it, not saying it can't be done to block it down by hair, but you might as well be blocking lead by hand at that point. So we're going to use a DA to shape this. You see it's changed its color, so we're good to apply it on there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of just pack it in there and get it on. Now, also with this, the first coat of this, we're going to get on there and we're going to pack into the channel. We're pretty much going to have to dry. This is going to be definitely a 2-coat process. So first coat is get it in the channel. Second coat, we're going to come back through and we're going to fill up any imperfections or pinholes in it as best we can. So like I said, there's what we're going to do on the first coat. We just kind of load it up. You see I'm going high with it. I'm trying not to work it too much. The problem with the long strand fiberglass, I mean, that's what also makes it strong, is the strands in it pull each other apart. So trying to work it down, you're pretty much fighting. It's the good part about it, you're fighting it. You could see, like when I start shaping it, if this is filler, it would only pull the top layer. Whereas this long hair, the long strand, it pretty much pulls the whole pile. But you get the idea what we're doing. We're just packing it in there, shaping it. We're gonna let it cure. And we got a pretty decent amount. We mixed up a good amount for what we're trying to do here. Just try to get this edge in there.
I have on other projects, not here, but I've also added fiberglass resin to this and made more of a consistent, smoother, self-leveling substrate.
All right, so we're gonna start out with this right here. Like I said, I packed it high. You're gonna see we're gonna come back with a DA and we're gonna cut it down and hit it with one more coat, and then we should be good. I did this on the other side. I did this in all the lead channels. So once we're done with the lead channels, that's the only areas we're using this on. And we'll go to getting it ready, prep for the epoxy.
So sanding this down, you see I'm not using a backing pad on a DA. I'm using the older style flat DA sanders. What I'm doing, I'm not following the TDS sheet here. I gotta say that they want to sand down with 80 grit according to the TDS. I'm using a 40 grit and I'm just ripping through the high spots. Then I'm coming back and dialing in with the 80 grit. I also want to say that we are not packing this very heavy on the lead channel. We don't want to build up the lead channel. I pretty much want to just fix the seam where both panels meet. Both panels were leveled out really good. The flow between them is really good. So you see we're trying to minimize the amount of fiberglass in this area. I really feel that this right here is a more than acceptable repair that should last the life of the time. Being the fiberglass is waterproof, we're not packing too much on, and I think there's going to be less chance of a failure.
So we got our DA on no backing pad, it's flat. What we're doing right here, we're basically just holding it flush and working it up and down to basically connect these 2 points. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not looking for show quality finish. We're gonna come back through and we're gonna lay our polyester and stuff on top of this, and probably dolphin clays, especially on this area. Saying that, this is not acceptable at this point. So like I said, we're gonna have to come back with our second coat. This second coat, we're actually gonna put on a little bit thicker. So I already got the fiberglass mixed up, and so same process. Let's just go ahead and pack it in all the areas that we missed. And see, I could push down a lot harder on this time and really get the fiberglass in everything. So I'm putting a lot of pressure on this one right now, forcing the fiberglass together, trying to make it a nicer, how it applies. Now, I said we're 40 grit on what we're sanding, and it doesn't really follow the TDS, but it goes a lot quicker. What we're gonna do, I'm trying to just remove fiberglass pretty quick and shape it. What we're gonna do then, we're gonna come back with 80 grit. You'll see in a second, and we gotta 80 grit the whole car anyway. So we'll come back with the 80 grit and we're gonna go over this, and then that will scuff it up for the primer following the TDS. So you get the idea. That's basically what we're doing. We'll come back through, we're gonna sand it again. When it's all dry, work over that, get it nice and smooth. I'll show you a couple pictures after it's done, and then we're gonna move on to the next step.
So now that we finished all our lead channels, the B pillars, the A pillars, and the lower rocker areas, I'm going to go ahead with a DA on 120 grit following the epoxy primer TDS, like I said earlier, and now we need to put a mechanical tooth on all the bare metal so the epoxy sticks according to the TDS. Saying that, this also is good in the sense that if this car was sitting around for over 24 hours, which it was because the lead channels took me a little bit longer with the fiberglass to sand down, I know there's no rust on this car, but having that tooth right before we go to paint is even better to make sure, you know, we just cut anything else that might have shown up on the card back down. Another thing I'll point out, as I was working the fiberglass filler with and then the DA on the bare metal, I was wearing gloves the whole time on the car. I'm trying to not touch the bare metal with my bare hands because you get your wax and your grease on there. So once we stripped it down with the Contour SCT, that's when I was wearing all gloves. Saying that, I can't tape in gloves. Every time I try to tape in gloves, it kind of sticks to the gloves and peels the gloves apart, and my wife, Megan, and Chase, my son, are helping me tape this car, and I'm really not going to make them put gloves on or anything else like this. So we're just doing our best not to touch anywhere bare metal on the car. What I am going to do, and you'll see in the future, is we're going to run wax and grease remover on this whole car. In the future, what I also want to do, I want to maybe do a video on taping down a car. You know, growing up, even 5-6 years ago, I never knew the process on taping a car, or, you know, how to do it more efficiently. You know, for me, it was go and get the Sunday paper, buy 20 stacks of it, you know, for 25-50 cents a piece, and then you just lay them out and tape the pieces together. What we're doing right here, we're basically connecting and putting the sticky side of the tape through all the areas that we want to tape up. We're taking this anti-static, this static cling painter automotive sheathing, and what we do, you see, we throw it over the whole car, and all the areas of the tape that now we have stuck out, we're just pushing down around those areas, and then we're coming back through and we're cutting it with a razor blade. We're basically, it's the opposite though, because we're cutting out the part of the car we want to paint, and then everywhere else is overhanging. It's not a super complicated concept once you sit there and think about what you're doing. So this is good though. You could paint just a hood on a vehicle. You can use this concept for anything else. And then what I'm doing, you can see I also taped out the door area, and I basically opened the door, took my excess, put it right down the door, and I'm cutting around there. So we're able to really paint the jams with the epoxy primer. We're not putting polyester on the door jambs, but I still want to get a good solid coat in there. But this just makes it more efficient for taping the whole car. We're trying to stop overspray and dirt coming up from the underside of the car. I really don't want the polyester in the wheel houses till we're ready for it. But this is the basic concept on how you tape something out. Like I said, in the future, maybe I'll do a step-by-step quick walk around video on how to tape something. Also realize with tape, there's different colors signify the different how strong the tape is. So we're using the green tape, which I found to be the strongest to hold all the areas, because we're not worried about ripping out paint. If we needed to worry about more about that, we'd use more of a yellow backing tape. Now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna mix our Omni Epoxy MP170. You could sit there. We're mixing this following the TDS sheet. We're using 2 parts of the primer itself to 1 part of the catalyst to half a part of reducer, which is optional. I do like the reducer. I think it lays out smoother. I think it gives you a better surface to build off of. You know, if your base material is smooth, that just makes everything else on top of it come out smoother. There's no reason, I think, to build up the epoxy any higher, and so I always add a half a part of acetone. Chase is stirring the epoxy for me, kind of helping me and showing me where my measurements are. And then what we need to do, we need to give this 15 minutes for an induction period before we could go ahead and start spraying that. That is very important and crucial, and it says that very clear in the TDS. I know this car is going to take a bunch of primer, so what I'll do, I'll load a lot of this primer in the gun and then mix my second round of primer, so as I'm spraying it, you know, I could just round robin everything. So what I'm doing right now is I'm putting wax and grease remover on the whole entire car. You see, at this point, this is crucial. Gloves, gloves, gloves. Clean rags. We're just going to wipe down as much of the car as we can. Now, wax and grease remover, it's, you know, back and forth, people will say, I only try to use wax and grease remover on top of epoxy or bare metal. Now we're on to the spraying area. I'm going to jam out the car first, and the reason I'm doing this, I just want a good seal up, and I don't want to add epoxy with polyester on there. I know I'm stepping on the car. Not saying that's the best thing. The car's in bare metal. It's epoxy. I'll go back through and I'll wipe that area if I can, but I just didn't want to fall on top of the car. It's one of the lesser of two evils. You see, again, I'm jamming out the car. I start on the car on the top, working down, and I'll start in the center of a panel, and I work my way out. And what I try to do, I've said this on other videos, is I'm trying to do like a 50% give or take overlap on the epoxy, and I try to keep a wet edge. What that basically means is while the paint is still wet and flowing, I connect the dots and I repaint that area. So if I do one side of the roof, you see right here I'm doing the one side of the hood. As soon as I'm done with the hood, I'll hit the top of the fender area, and then I'll go to the other side of the hood and start it back over, keeping that wet edge. I mean, the paint takes a little while to flash over, so there's still time to go ahead and catch your edge after that. Then I'll come back and I just kind of catch it and keep working our way down. I'm still, you know, experimenting with the best way to paint cars. I'm not saying I'm an expert. You know, it takes plenty of time. I mean, I'm far from an expert actually. So lots of practice. I still have a lot to learn. Every time I prime, I try to pretend like it's almost a real deal in the paint process. Now the final step on this part of the video, we're going to lay our Slick Sand High Build polyester primer. We're following the TDS you see, and what I did, I sprayed this after the epoxy primer flashes. So basically the epoxy primer has a chemical bond time. I think it's 3 days, but we're 30 minutes after our last coat of our second coat of epoxy primer. I'm using a GPG DeVilbiss spray gun. This is a polyester spray gun. So it's got a 2.5 nozzle tip, and what it does, it could spray lots of volume and really lays down a pretty slick surface for the amount. You're basically spraying fillable primer here. This is basically, it's real thick, so you almost need a special gun. I've used primer guns before, and I'm not saying they don't work, but the smaller tips and everything else seem like it puts it on really dry, and then it pretty much gives like a rough textured surface, almost like sandpaper. So this gun, to show you how much material I'm spraying on, I sprayed on a whole gallon in almost one coat. I came back through and I went through the jams and everything else. I think what I've experienced and experimented with this stuff, again, I'm not saying I'm an expert using this stuff. I'm still learning every day. But as I spray it on, I feel like the wetter coats, it's very hard to get this to run. Actually, seems like they work better when you give it time, and it kind of just levels itself out because the coat's so wet. So I think the 2.5 tip, the polyester gun, I mean, is really extra helpful in this. And again, what I said earlier, the smoother we can get it on, the less we're wasting, because now we don't have to block down our own rough spots. Again, that's not saying you can't use a regular gun. Try it, experiment on your car, and let me know how it works out.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up the video on the 73 Challenger. You see it's sitting in the polyester primer. What we're gonna do in the future of this car, first is gonna come off the frame jig. At that point, it's gonna sit for a little bit. At least, I would say about 30 days. I like to leave my cars a little bit longer. The TDS on the polyester primer says it needs to sit for at least 7 days before you sand it. If you went there and sanded it right now, well, even tomorrow, right now it's still, I wouldn't go ahead because it might still be somewhat wet. But if you're gonna sand this in 2-3 days, you get the whole car perfect. And then even though this is high quality polyester primer, all fillers, primers have a shrinkage thing. So they're gonna shrink a little bit. So that's what we're worried about. We want the car to shrink up, dry out, everything just be done before we do the body work. So I want to show you real quick, we have another Challenger here with a brand new fender. So this is an E-coat fender. We have a thickness gauge, a mil gauge. So basically, I'm going to show you how much filler and epoxy we put on that car and what we have to work with now and why we went with the polyester. So this car from the factory, so this would be an AMD fender, has 827 thousandths thickness of E-coat material on it. 800 thousandths, 780, you get the point. So even there, 472. So looking back and walking back to this car, like I said, we sprayed a gallon on this car. So that whole gallon of filler basically is sitting on this car. Measuring this car, if we hold this thickness up to it, we're at 4,291 there, 4.291 thousandths. So these are mils. And this is 6,535. So right here we got 6,457. Now I will say, I told you I went extra heavy here and on these areas. So right here we should sew more. So right here I have 16.38. So 380,000. So you could see those extra coats, 16.661. You get the point. Basically, we put a lot of filler on this car, and what that's gonna do, you saw we were blocking down the E-coat, how much it evened out just on that thin of a coat, how we were almost able to block the car straight. So now that we have, you know, almost 4 or 5 times as much material on the car, when we block this thing down level, it should be easier to even out. We're still gonna have to do some body work on this car. It's not perfect, but we know that. So this is just an easy way to get a bunch of filler on the car, and like I said, have it where the body work phase is a little bit easier, and we're addressing the areas that we know we want to put extra material on. So hopefully this video helped you. It's a little bit different than other videos that we, you know, on body work and stuff. It's a different approach. That's what we're trying to do. We try different things. We do different things on our channel, and I try to show different things on the channel to just give an idea. You take a little bit from this video, you take a little bit from that video, and just do what you think is going to work better for your situation. Looking around at this car, I'm really happy with it. You could see the GPG gun, that the Bilbis polyester gun, it laid this material out super slick. And that's another thing I was telling you too. What we want this smooth finish on all these parts parts of the car walking around. Same thing with the other side. Looking down the other side of the car, running down there, you could see all in all, if we start with a smooth, slick finish, sanding it down, we don't have to take as much material off. We do want to take a lot of this material off, but we don't have to take up excessive amounts. I mean, we're not sitting there like some people I've hear guys and body shops and everything, they'll throw a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch of filler on the car and they're open about it. They're happy about it. So here, I don't want to do this. I want to keep this car as thin as possible. I want when you go to a car show, you look at these door edges and it doesn't look thick. So that's basically what we're doing. We're going to come back to this car. We got some other projects in the shop that I'm going to start filming on in the meantime. This car, I will say, I am going to paint it on the channel. It's going to be done a little bit different than the Barracuda that we're going to paint. I know a bunch of people have been asking about the bodywork on that video. I am getting to it. It's cold right now. We got a lot of things going on, and this channel, if you haven't you've seen it, is mostly a metal channel. I do mostly metal every day. The bodywork's kind of like my friends and family side hobby, so it doesn't get done as fast. So saying that, stay tuned. I will paint both the cars. Hopefully in the next 6 months, this car will be painted. The Barracuda will be painted. You can probably see it in the back of the video. So thank you very much for sticking through all this, watching these videos, supporting the channel. We just hit a milestone the other day. We had 10,000 subscribers. I mean, that to me, when I started this channel, is completely unheard of. So I really appreciate everyone who supported us from the beginning up until today, right now. And if you just subscribe right now, I really appreciate it. Liking our videos helps, just supporting the channel in general, really. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Megan says thank you, my family does. Thank you, it's gonna be great watching these memories and future of us working together. So I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. We'll get another video out shortly. Thank you very much for tuning in to this one, and we'll see you next time.